has started to slow down, so we'll go ahead and get started so we can start and finish on time. We're excited to have you all here this morning for what I believe is our 5th or 6th annual workshop about post-construction stormwater compliance. I'm Craig Miller. I'm chair of the Regional Stormwater Partnership of the Carolinas, and I work at the City of Charlotte Stormwater Services as the Municipal Stormwater Permit Supervisor. Next slide, please. Okay. Regional Stormwater Partnership is primarily made up of member municipalities in the Charlotte metro region. You can see the current members listed under RSPC members. We currently have 23 members, and we, of course, welcome others. We are all about helping our member municipalities meet requirements in their municipal stormwater permits, primarily focus on outreach and education in the permit, as far as permit efforts, as well as tech talks and workshops like this. And we've had many elected officials workshops where we educate our elected officials about the importance of stormwater. Our mission is the Regional Stormwater Partnership of the Carolinas educates and brings awareness to the public, local businesses, and education centers of our region about stormwater issues and their impact on water quality and our environment. We further aim to unite local stormwater programs by sharing information and ideas in order to discuss and address similar stormwater issues on a regional level. So we meet quarterly, and then we have an annual meeting in February. It'll be on February 14th. It will be hybrid, in person in Charlotte, and also via Zoom, which we're on today. We'd love to have you join us and give you the opportunity to connect with us and other member municipalities. We're also exploring allowing companies to sponsor an upcoming meeting or workshop. We'll have more information about that at our annual meeting, but basically it'll allow sponsoring companies to receive marketing benefits and share information about your company and what you do, and provide some marketing materials to those that are attending the workshop and meeting. And if you'd like more information about that, you can email carrie.rayburn@risingsolutionsplc.com. Rising Solutions is our consultant facilitator, and they are working behind the scenes on many, many things and keep us running efficiently. So here's our workshop agenda. We'll have 5 20-minute presentations. I won't read through each one of the titles, but the first one will be 2. Okay, someone said the annual meeting will be in 2023, but it's 2024. Thank you for that comment. Anyways, so yeah, 5 presentations, each 20 minutes long. And then we'll end around 11 o'clock and also have a Q&A session at the end. And thank you to all of our presenters, Kara Becker, who is project coordinator, City of Charlotte, Scott Doty, safety manager with City of Charlotte. They will co-present first. And then Jay Wilson, he's the erosion control manager for the City of Charlotte. Sam Jackson will present. He's stormwater inspector with G2 Design PA. Mallory Hodgson is the Director of Public Works with Town Harrisburg. And finally, John McDonald, who's Senior Government Affairs Associate with North Carolina League of Municipalities. And then David Caldwell with Mecklenburg County will facilitate our question and answer session. This is an interactive webinar. If you hover over anywhere on the screen at the bottom, you'll see a chat feature where you can enter comments. And then there's a Q&A feature where we'd like you to enter questions. So those will be tracked, and then speakers can answer those. They can type in answers as we go along throughout the workshop, and they'll also be brought up during the Q&A session. But everybody is muted because we have a lot of participants today, so you won't be able to like speak to everybody during the workshop. And as I said, there is a 10-minute Q&A session at the end as well. 2 PDH credits are available for attendance today. You must be present for the entire workshop, and Zoom tracks your time in the workshop. And you will need to log in with the same email that you registered with. Just after the workshop, complete the evaluation form by scanning that QR code that you see there, or you can find it at the website that's shown there. And the certificate of attendance, PDH verification certificate, will be emailed to you. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first presentation by Kara Becker and Scott Doty.
Good morning, everybody. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, good morning. I'm going to be kicking off our workshop today. My name is Kara Becker. I am the Surface Water Quality Project Coordinator here at the City of Charlotte. I'm also going to be co-presenting today with Scott Doty. He's our Stormwater Services Safety Coordinator. And today we're going to be talking about safety, the key to a successful and safe SCM inspection. So some of our objectives. Why do we care about safety? We care about safety because we want to make sure that you guys are getting home safe to your loved ones and your family. But we also want to make sure that you're being safe when you're going out and doing your SCM inspections as well. So a couple of our topics today will be PPE, dangers in the field, heat safety, cold weather. I'll give you a few SCM specific examples as well. And then Scott will talk to us about our confined space practices. So what is the difference between OSHA and NIOSH? Actually, OSHA and NIOSH. So OSHA is your Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They were both actually started during the Occupation and Safety Act in 1970, but what's actually the difference between the two? So OSHA sets your standards, and they also provide education, outreach, and assistance. So if somebody actually gets hurt on your site, you actually have to report it to OSHA, and then they can also assess workplace violations and then fines to businesses as well. So NIOSH actually conducts research, provides information, education, and training in occupational safety and health. And they actually gather the information and then conduct the research. And then that goes over into actually translating to products and services that we use out in the field. So each job site has different conditions where different types of safety apparatuses need to be used, or different type of safety PPE that's required. So that's where ASTM and ANSI comes into play. You can see codes after your footwear or type of safety glasses that you need. So these two national institutes actually provide you that information. So ASTM would be like a type of footwear that you use on your job site that's required. And then ANSI would be the type of hard hat that you wear on the job site. So different job sites and different industries require different PPE that's used. So all of those organizations work together to ensure that everyone works as safe as possible in their workplace. So know before you go, make sure you have an itinerary. You want to share your calendar with your supervisor. You want to make sure you're putting your field meetings on there with your address, so that way people know your location. Emergency contacts, it's always a good practice. Our water quality group does this, where we have a shared spreadsheet with everybody's emergency contact. In case of emergencies, or in case you get hurt at work, they're able to call your loved ones. Identification is really crucial. When you're on site, you want to make sure you have an ID badge on you or business card to be able to hand to landowners or businesses. And then you want to make sure that your safety vest or your hard hat also has your logo on it. And then JHAs, also known as JSAs, these job hazard analysis, you want to make sure that you determine potential risk on your job site and then try and implement preventative controls. Then once you figure out what hazards you have on site, you want to make sure that you hold toolbox talks at your vehicle with coworkers or workers that are on site to make sure that you inform those workers of the hazards that are located on the site and then how you can implement proper procedures and PPE. First aid kits are really important. Make sure those are in your vehicles. When you get to your site, you want to make sure that you put it in a backpack. If you use an inhaler or an EpiPen, you want to make sure that those items are also in your backpack when you're conducting SCM inspections. It's really vital that you have that stuff on you because first and foremost, if you get hurt on site, you want to be able to administer first aid immediately. And sometimes if you get hurt, you're not able to make it back to your vehicle. So you want to make sure that you have those items on you in the field at all times. And our biggest rule of thumb in safety is if you see something, say something. If you see anything on site that you don't think is right or doesn't look right, you want to always speak up and say something to the foreman or supervisor on site, or, just let somebody know that this isn't correct, because you never know when you can save somebody's life or prevent them from being hurt. And our best rule of thumb at the City of Charlotte is always have a buddy system. You want to make sure that you're bringing a coworker out, especially if you're working on some large sites with multiple SCMs. But even if you're going out to some smaller sites, it's just safe to be able to have somebody there with you in case you get hurt, or if they get hurt, you have somebody that's there for backup that can also help administer first aid and call 911. So the hierarchy of controls is the next thing that we're going to be talking about. Most people think that PPE is your most effective way to prevent getting hurt, but when in fact, actually, there's a few other things that we can do to prevent safety. First, you want to eliminate and remove the hazard from the site. If you can't do that, let's try and substitute that hazard for something less hazardous, or go ahead and replace the hazard altogether. Engineering controls, you want to isolate people from the hazard. So that would be types of guards that you can put in front of machinery. Administrative controls, you want to change the way people work, so implementing different types of training. And then last but not least, you have PPE, where you would go ahead and wear that personal protective equipment to reduce the hazard from you getting hurt on site. So proper personal protective equipment is equipment that we wear to minimize getting hurt in the workplace. Some examples of this are your hard hat. In case you didn't know, hard hats actually do expire. So the way to actually figure out how your hard hat expires is on the inside of your brim. You actually can see this dial that's located up here. This correlates to the months of the year, and then this correlates to the year that it was manufactured in. So wherever this arrow is pointing is the month that it was manufactured in. And then the numbers on either side is the year that it's manufactured in. So you want to make sure, typically your hard hat is manufactured and good for 5 years, but you always want to check with your manufacturer's schedule just to make sure. And that doesn't mean that when your safety representative comes and hands it to you that it's 5 years from then. So that's why you always want to check when your hard hat was actually manufactured. Next is 100% natural fiber clothing. We want to make sure that we're wearing good field clothing to prevent us from getting hurt from the elements. Proper footwear like composite toe boots, steel-toed boots are huge in construction. And then snake boots is what the water quality group implements when we walk around at the City of Charlotte. And then some dangers in the field that we're going to talk about because we all love these things. Snakes are our first one. Snakes are always found in riprap when we're walking around SCMs. They're components for housing warmth, and providing warmth when it's cold out. And also those voids between the rocks also help with being able to protect them a little bit better. So we implement on the LTS group, we make sure that we implement wearing snake boots to not have those snake fangs penetrate our boots or get to our legs. And there's also 4 poisonous snakes that are located throughout North Carolina, but the 2 most common are, excuse me, rattlesnakes that are out towards the mountains, or in the Piedmont in Charlotte, we have copperheads, which is our most common that we go up against in the field. Next are spiders. They tend to be in damp, cool places. And then our most common that we battle here in North Carolina are brown recluses and black widows. These can be found in inlets and outlet structures of SCM. So if you're inspecting an outlet structure, make sure that you're always wary of what's behind you or what's around you. Next are ticks. While it's good to always have preventative measures in place for ticks, you want to be extra vigilant when ticks are out in the warmer months. And then you want to make sure that you wear bug spray that's at least 20 to 30% DEET. And then bees, be careful when you're walking in the spring. You want to make sure that you're looking where you're walking, but also there's a few different types of bees and hornets that actually have their nest in the ground. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding those areas at all costs. And then if you do have an EpiPen because you're allergic to bees, you want to make sure that that's always on you as well. So heat safety, sometimes you want to make sure that your employees are actually fit for duty. When you have new employees, they might not be used to working in hot conditions if they've moved from other states. So you want to make sure that you establish a heat tolerance in the first place with each employee that's going out into the field during our hot weather months. But then you also want to implement adequate acclimatization, getting used to how warm it is out, making sure that you're drinking a lot of fluids, taking proper breaks, and then taking breaks in the shade as well. You want to make sure that you're always drinking plenty of water, and it's a good practice to keep a cooler in your vehicle with snacks and water to replenish vital nutrients that we need when it's hot out. And you want to make sure that you're always avoiding sugary drinks as well when it's hot. And then some additional controls that you can take are neck fans or some cooling towels that you can get and put those around your neck when you're walking in the field as well. But the biggest thing is heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So with heat exhaustion, you get pretty thirsty and sweaty. But the biggest thing is when you're walking with your buddy on site, if you realize that it's really hot and humid out, and you see this with the confusion or dizziness and they become unconscious, you want to make sure that you call 911 right away so you can administer first aid, and 911 will walk you through what you need to do to make sure that we are keeping them safe, keeping them comfortable until 911 can get there. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit about cold weather safety. We're moving into our cooler months of North Carolina. Sometimes we can get some snow. So we want to make sure that we're monitoring the weather and wind chill factor. We also want to do the same thing of making sure that we're implementing adequate breaks in warm and dry places. You want to schedule your work during the warmest part of the day. And then some food that you can keep on you is high in carbohydrates. That helps you in the winter time. And the difference between warm weather and cold weather, warm weather, we want, 100% cotton on so it breathes. But in cold weather, you actually want to avoid cotton and wear different layers. You can always take layers off. You can't put layers on when you're at work and you forget them at home. So you want to make sure that you're always wearing layered clothing as well. You want to avoid walking on wet and icy surfaces that can cause slips, trips, and falls. And then you want to avoid muddy areas when the temperatures start getting a little bit warmer as well, because that can suck your boot in pretty fast. I've actually had that happen to me in front of a coworker where I just kind of jumped a little stream quick and my boots sank right in. So you always want to make sure that you're being vigilant, you're being slow, safe, controlled movements. And avoid touching metal also in the winter time with bare hands. Make sure you always bring gloves with you when it's cold out. A lot of our SCMs have head walls with handrail on it, so you want to make sure that you're not touching that with your bare skin. And then last but not least, what actually happens if we fall into the water? So, we're walking around these wet ponds and a lot of SCMs that have water in them with steep slopes. So if you fall into water or your partner falls into water, you want to make sure that you get them back to your vehicle and turn it on, warm it up. They need to remove their clothing as fast as possible and get into some new dry clothing. So make sure that you have blankets, extra clothing in your car at all times, especially when it's hot and cold out. You never know when you're going to have to switch something out in the field just in case it's to protect you. But also you want to make sure that you have warm beverages available as well, and make sure you call 911 so that way they can come out and assess you if you start having any type of symptoms with frostbite or hypothermia or anything like that. You want to make sure that you get to them immediately. So some additional hazards that we have with inspecting SCMs that we've seen are poorly constructed structures. When you're inspecting newly constructed structures or SCMs, you want to make sure that they're actually built correctly. Usually we do final walks for this, but sometimes issues can actually be missed on final walks. In this instance, it was missed that the footer wasn't actually poured in this outlet structure. And when a maintenance worker went in to provide some maintenance work, they actually jumped into the structure and they sank up to their hips in this. You can see on this upper picture right here, this is before the footer was poured, and then this was after. So when you're inspecting SCMs or you have workers performing maintenance on these SCMs, you want to make sure that they're doing it slowly, they're making controlled movements, and they're not just rushing and jumping in and out of systems just in case they get hurt or something isn't actually built correctly. Next is limiting risk. You want to identify the safest way to access various parts of your SCM. So in this photo, would it be easier to walk down this steep slope that's, met with water that we could fall into? Or do we want to walk over the riprap with the fallen tree? What do you think would be the best possible way to get there? And then unexpected encounters, we've actually run into people living in outlet structures. They just pop the manhole off and it provides, a structure and a dry place for them to live in. So, always make sure that when you're opening manholes or you see anything that's laying around there, like trash that looks like somebody is living there, always make sure to kind of avoid those places or make sure you have a buddy there just in case. And then also you can see, make sure you're wearing good soled boots. We have run into needles, glass bottles, different things that we can step on that would harm us. And you just want to make sure that you're really watching where you're walking when you're walking around the SCMs. And then last but not least, additional safety trainings. This SCM outfall that you see in this picture here is actually located next to a CATS facility. So our LTS group was actually able to go take an additional safety training with our CATS transit system to provide us some information about how we can inspect our SCMs that are located in CATS facilities around trains, rail cars, and trolleys. So you want to make sure that when you're inspecting SCMs that are located with different entities or different businesses, that you check with them first and their safety representative to make sure that if there's any additional trainings that you need to take, that you're taking those so you can actually access that business or that entity's property. Some other examples that you might need to do as well, if you're performing work in the right-of-way, you might have to get a right-of-way permit. And also pay attention to traffic control where you can utilize the watch handbook. And next, Scott will be talking to us about confined space entry.
All right, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me and having me. So we'll talk a little bit about confined space. What is considered a confined space? A confined space is a space that is large enough and so configured that an employee's body can easily enter it, has limited or restricted means of entry or exit, is not designed for continuous occupancy. And those would be storage tanks, silos, manholes, tunnels, pipes, culverts. Confined space can prevent physical and atmospheric hazards that can be prevented if addressed prior to entering to perform work. And if you look into the 1910 146 general industry OSHA standard or the 1926.1203, a lot of numbers there for construction, those are what govern how you go and perform confined space entries, whether it's general industry or you're actively constructing a project. And what a non-permit confined space, it does not contain or have the potential, and that's the big key right there, is have the potential to contain any hazard capable of causing death or serious physical harm. Whereas a permit confined space is one that has one or more of the following characteristics: contains or has the potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere, contains a material that has the potential to engulf an entrant, and that's where you go for your silos. On active construction sites where you have deep excavations, those can engulf the entrance. Has an internal configuration such that an entrant could be trapped or asphyxiated by inwardly converging walls or by a floor which slopes downward and tapers to a smaller cross-section, or contains any other recognizable serious hazard or safety health hazard. Prior to work starting, a competent person must evaluate the work site. Well, what constitutes a competent person? A competent person must be designated by the employer and have knowledge of OSHA standards, ANSI standards, NIOSH standards, the same standards that Kara mentioned before, and be able to identify and actively and efficiently correct those hazards. You want to identify the confined space, including permit spaces. Where there are changes in the use of the configuration to the non-permit space, the competent person must reevaluate the space and reclassify it as necessary. So anytime there's a change in your permit space, that's why that competent person has to be on site and make those corrections to get the entrance out and correct those deficiencies right away. The employer must demonstrate that continuous forced air ventilation alone is sufficient to maintain that permit space is safe for entry. Developing and monitoring and inspection data, document the determinations and supporting data, make them available to each employee who enters the permit space. And when you look into the 1910 and into the 1926 OSHA standard, it has all the different requirements that are required for each individual, whether it's training, whether it's what your confined space permit looks like, all that information is in those different standards. A permit space can be reclassified after all hazards within the space have been eliminated. Teams must consist of at least three separate individuals doing different tasks. You have your entry supervisor, your authorized attendants, and then your attendants. Some of the problems that could happen if you become into oxygen deficiency space, confined space, is from 15 to 19.5%. You have decreased abilities, less coordination. 10 to 15%, you have increased respiration, poor judgment. 9 to 10% oxygen, you have fainting, nausea, vomiting. And from 4 to 8%, you can have death. And some of your required equipment for confined space entry, you have to have your gas detector that should be able to detect carbon monoxide, oxygen, hydrogen sulfide, and methane. Two-way radios, flashlight, hard hat, safety vest, and safety glasses. Required safety equipment for your supervisor and attendant is a phone or two-way radio. Like Kara mentioned, you always want to make sure you have your good, well-stocked, in-service first aid kit. And the big thing that a lot of people miss is a confined space sign. You want to make sure you have that sign out there, whether to alert the general public, whether they're transiting via walkways, sidewalks, or vehicular traffic. And that's where your watch handbook would come into effect in North Carolina. Additional equipment, rubber boots, gloves, coveralls, knee pads, body harness retrieval system. You also want to make sure that the harnesses that you're wearing, the daily inspections have been done on them. Make sure there's no cuts, tears. Your retrieval system, make sure it's in the new standard that came out from ANSI and OSHA implemented back in September of this year. Earlier this year, there was a new standard that was implemented. You want to make sure you have your safety lines and a ladder if need be. And the reason why we do this is we all want to get home safely. The reason why OSHA, all these OSHA standards, ANSI standards, NIOSH standards are out there is so we can all get home to our families. My family is here on the right.
And my family is on the left, and this is why we implement the safety that we do at work. And we wanted to share it with you guys today because we want to make sure that you guys are getting home to your families safe and sound and be able to have some fun with them outside of work. So thank you for listening to our talk today. I hope you guys take a little bit away from this and how you can implement some safety into your programs. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to Scott and I, and we'd be happy to answer them. Thanks, guys.
I forgot that I was supposed to read their bios before they presented, so I apologize for that, but great job. I am going to go ahead and read the bio for Jay Wilson before he starts. Jay graduated from NC State University and has 20 years of experience working for Phase 1 and 2 municipal jurisdictions, primarily in water quality specific positions around MPDES permit implementation and management, watershed planning, environmental policy, and construction site stormwater. Currently, Jay administers the soil erosion and sedimentation control program for the city of Charlotte.
Well, I thank you for that, Craig. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Good morning to all. I saw a lot of familiar names in the attendance log, and it's nice to see all those folks. I look forward to the day where we can all do this in person, but I'm thankful that we can so easily have these virtual opportunities and get large groups together and share information. So it's nice to see everyone, even across the virtual platform here. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some common issues we're seeing here in Charlotte with construction and closeout of stormwater SCMs, and hopefully provide a little insight and information for folks that are in a similar position. So some of the quick objectives, we'll really quickly cover, what SCMs do, which I imagine most of us are experts in already. We'll talk about some common problems that we find during the SCM final inspection process that might keep folks from getting their COs and bond releases and final acceptances, and hopefully help attendees kind of recognize and correct these issues prior to as-built submittals, or help you and your jurisdiction prevent problems down the road with the operation and maintenance of these SCMs. So real quickly, as NCDEQ states, stormwater control measure, or SCM, as the modern parlance would dictate, is any permanent structural device designed, built, maintained to remove pollutants from stormwater before it reaches our streams and drinking water reservoirs. Pretty simple process, concept, and I think probably required by ordinance and rule in most of our jurisdictions. Some common features of SCMs are some sort of water quality treatment component. There's channel protection for downstream conveyances and systems, of course, the detention and flood control, infiltration, and every good SCM comes with an adequate long-term maintenance plan to ensure its long life and utility through life of service. Here in Charlotte, and probably in most places, there's a pretty standard SCM approval process. You get design approval, you go out and you be able to build it in the field, then you have some sort of final acceptance and approval process that may include an as-built survey and a field inspection. And we're really going to kind of talk about that last step. I think a lot of the problems that you see during construction are evident during these kind of final steps. So hopefully we can adequately cover some of the construction problems while covering the final acceptance hurdles. There's a quick list of SCM types. I get the feeling that most of you don't need any review of those. But I did want to kind of point out the way we've thought about inspecting these in quantity. And we've really tried to reduce these SCMs down to common elements. So rather than have BMP specific inspection tasks, we try to identify common elements that are present on most or all SCMs that we're seeing in our jurisdiction. And then those elements are things like inlets and forebays and treatment cells and outlet control structures, or OCS, or riser barrel, if you will, outfalls, embankments, of course, and conveyances to move the water around. So kind of roughly divvied it up into those categories. So just a little basic anatomy of an SCM. And again, this is probably a review, so we're not going to spend much time on this. You've got an inlet side, which you can't see the inlet. It's included by the head wall there in the lower left corner, but the inlet's coming in to this SCM from the lower left corner. And stormwater is discharged first to a forebay, which is designed to reduce velocity, drop out the heavy particles, maybe drop out trash and grit and sand. And then the water moves on to the primary treatment cell. The forebay is a treatment cell, I think, but for this illustration, let's just consider the kind of the primary treatment cell in the back as the treatment cell. And then, of course, you can see our OCS hiding there at the bottom of the wet face of the embankment down here. It's that 4x4 precast concrete structure, which has a barrel pipe over to the outfall, which you just can't quite see over to the right. And then, one of the most critical elements of any SCM, the embankment that kind of holds it all in place while the SCM does its job. So our inspection elements that we found helpful so far, and this is a constantly evolving process, are inspection for stabilization, inspection of inlets, inspection of forebays and treatment cells, inspection of outlet control structures and outfalls, and inspection of underground treatment systems, filtration treatment systems, and embankments. And then overall and other conditions kind of apply on an as-needed basis. So for this kind of the main meat of the presentation here, I'm going to just basically walk through some prompts from our own inspection process. So if you work in the city of Charlotte and you have to get an as-built approval, you can take these questions from this presentation and use them to determine your own readiness, when it comes time for as-built. So these are the exact things that we're looking for in the field in order to approve the final as-built condition of the SCM. So of course, the big one, I think, for everyone, and that we all see in all jurisdictions, and I think this is a struggle not only for regulators, but also for contractors and owners sometimes, is stabilization, which is why I want to talk about it early and think about it often during project construction. But you're asking yourself some basic questions. Is the SCM adequately protected by a permanent ground cover that's suitable for the SCM type and exposure? Is the measure free of cattails? Have any plantings been installed as shown on the plans if required in the littoral shelf or otherwise? And really, is the vegetative ground cover well maintained? So every SCM comes with an operation and maintenance agreement, and adequate and ongoing maintenance is a critical element in order for these SCMs to operate properly. So that's a real big thing. We want to ensure that it's not overgrown or taken over by volunteer vegetation when we're doing our final inspection. And if, as with all of these questions you see, if if the answer to any of these are no, then at least in the city of Charlotte, you're in danger of not having final approval. So this is a fairly common scene at SCM conversion time. Oftentimes embankments will start looking like this, where there may have been an adequate temporary vegetative ground cover established during initial phases of construction, and it's given way to volunteer growth. And what you're seeing in the background is that dog fennel. It's quite common. I'm sure you see it all over in the Piedmont at least. And this, would not be considered adequate stabilization for an SCM. Again, these are all pictures of SCMs that have been submitted for final approval. And I think this one goes without saying, if you don't have any vegetative ground cover on your SCM, then we can't sign off for your vegetative ground cover. You've got to get something that is permanent and regenerative and takes a maintenance regime. Another SCM where you can see the matting on the lower part of the slope still, but it didn't help nurture the turf grass crop that was there, and you're seeing a lot of volunteer vegetation. So, from far away, it might look like there's adequate vegetative cover, but if you look closely, you'll see that the majority of the ground surface is not shielded from raindrops by the vegetation, and that exposes the area to ongoing erosion and unnecessary maintenance of your SCM. And here is another example, quite common. We see they've taken a lot of time and energy to stabilize, probably sod the interior of this SCM, and the temporary vegetation that was established on the embankment during construction wasn't nurtured and maintained, and has largely died off, and the permanent vegetation is being reestablished. This is a common condition and something that really should hopefully keep an eye on when you're out in the field. The regulators, while you're there during construction, these are things to point out and talk about during active construction, so they don't become an issue right at the jumping off point. And if you're designing or building and turning these things over, then this is something that you would do well to think about early in the process, the final stabilization. Inlets are flow diversion structures. So, a lot of these SCMs have flow diversion structures to divert a certain portion of the flow to the treatment device and allow the remainder to bypass the system. If you have a flow diversion structure upstream from your SCM, it's critical to ensure that that is operating as designed and free of trash, clogs, or some sort of damage. Are functional aprons present at each inlet into the SCM? Are those inlets free from erosion and other signs of damage? And are any inlet swells or conveyances adequately stabilized and free of erosion, sedimentation, and woody vegetation, or other signs of damage? I will say that the woody vegetation is an ongoing issue that we see a lot in SCMs around here in the Charlotte jurisdiction. So here's what I'd consider a conveyance to an SCM. You see the outfall there. In general, The conveyance looks fairly stable, but you can see above the head wall, there is a rill that's developed that, you know, the rills do not self-heal, they have to be repaired. And the stabilization just in the immediate contributing drainage area leaves a little bit to be desired. Again, you need to have at least a 70% cover with a permanent regenerative type turf grass or maintainable vegetative cover that is appropriate for the uses required from the facility. Here are some inlets to a basin. There's a couple problems we might see during construction. On the left-hand side, you will see a probably undersized apron that's beginning to be overtaken by some cattails, and there's actually some black willow growing there too, which is a tree. And it looks like there might be some erosion happening here on the lower part of that apron. The picture to the right shows another inlet with similar problems. You've got woody growth, the black willow growing there, along with some cattails right at the inlet, which could cause some problems, and certainly is not what I'd consider a maintained turf cover. 4 bays and treatment cells. Some questions we asked on this one is 4 bay free of excessive sedimentation. Does the 4 bay have a permanent ground cover with positive drainage and no sumps, holes, or standing water? This is a big one and a problem we battle a lot at the end of the project. Oh, I'm sorry. Is the rock berm, if installed, functioning as intended? And that means not clogged or covered in sediment or trash. Is the treatment cell itself free of excessive sedimentation and damage? And is the SCM free of excessive algal growth? For our purposes, we try to make sure that we have less than about 1/3 of the surface area covered by algal growth. That's usually only a problem in summertime months or in the early summer, late spring. And then the catch-all is the water free of sheen, odor, and other obvious signs of pollution. Here is a 4 bay that we might see during conversion. You can see from this 4 bay in the background, in the upper right-hand side, you see that that's a sand filter. The 4 bay for these sand filters are usually extended dry detention. That's how we see them a lot in Charlotte. And extended dry detention should have a uniform bottom with no sumps or holes, no standing water, that has a turf type cover that is easily mowed or maintained. So just from the general look, it looks like this entire 4 bay is a little bit lower than the treatment cell. So I don't know if the problem is during construction and a bust with grades, or if there were some other issues that happened out here, but this is going to be an uphill battle for the applicant here to regrade this 4 bay area and get it to function as designed. It's important that these 4 bays have positive drainage all the way to the treatment cell. And if that means you have to actually design or build some sort of conveyance to move that water from the outfalls, then perhaps that's something you should think about during design or with a revision if necessary. Another picture of a 4 bay, and you can kind of see those deposited sediments. They've been saturated and dried out, and you start to see the shrink swell. Again, that's probably not very compact material and difficult to grow grass on, and unlikely to drain properly. Here's a 4 bay where they covered the earthen embankment with rock. Now, the 4 bay and main treatment cell, so the 4 bay on the left and the main treatment cell on the right, should be able to equalize underwater. So, in general, I think I would prefer to see these 4 bays constructed out of rock, like a coffer. I think sometimes it's okay to have earth with a rock type weir in the middle, but it's critical that these be able to equalize between the 4 bay filling up, rushing over the embankment, and eroding it, as we see in this instance here. So this is kind of a fake weir, I would say, and will need to be removed and replaced. Outlet control structures. Are orifice weirs and spillways clear of trash and debris and able to function? Is the turn down orifice protection installed if it's a wet pond? Trash racks. Is OCS free of other visible signs of damage? Does the OCS have steps installed? That kind of touches back to the safety things that were talked about by Kara and Scott. And is the pond filled to the level of permanent water quality orifice if it's a wet pond? And then other general observations. Here's a couple OCS outlet control structures we've seen recently. Of course, the one on the left kind of speaks for itself. The trash rack has been removed and is missing now. The one on the right is a little bit less obvious. What you're looking at here is an orifice at the bottom of an outlet control structure that should have been plugged up after the erosion control skimmer was removed. This is a sand filter and will stage up and filter through the sand. But in this configuration, there is a bypass present with the water being able to escape directly through this old skimmer borehole. Here's the turn down water quality orifice protection installed. You can see in this particular wet pond that the water level was not at the permanent water quality level. This could cause a problem for acceptance. It will in Charlotte and maybe in your jurisdiction. If it's not holding water, we want to know why. It might be an extensive drought, or there could be problems with the riser or OCS. Here's another one. Looks okay kind of at first glance. Does anyone see the problems on this one? Some missing mounts. So it's important that not only these things are in the right place, but they appear to have the right hardware. The little things can make the difference between success and failure. This is an easy fix, but just something that really shouldn't be like this at this stage of the operation. This was the inside of that OCS we saw earlier, where you could see some sediment has gotten into the outlet control structure through the existing skimmer orifice. We'll move on to outfalls. Is the outfall apron and ground surface at the end of apron free of erosion? Is the outfall an apron free from obstructions that may inhibit or impair drainage from the barrel pipe? This is an important one, that last one, and we'll see why here in a moment. Here's a barrel pipe on the left coming out of an SCM, and you can see that there's starting to be a sediment deposition at the bottom of the pipe. The sediment all in and of itself isn't the worst thing in the world, but it indicates that there's standing water coming back in through the barrel pipe. If your barrel pipe isn't designed to have standing water in it, that could be a real problem. So in general, we want to make sure that our outfalls are free flowing and that the grades and elevations at those points work out so that you get a good positive flow from the outfall to the receiving stream or conveyance. On the right is familiar. I used that picture from the other inlet, but you can see that there is some obstruction with black willow growing there, and could cause some problems with drainage from that flared in section. Here's another one where it's not woody growth or riprap mounded up, but there's just been some deposition at the end of the flared in section. It's enabled the turf to grow, or the grasses to grow very well there, pasture-like grasses, which you can't see it from this photo, but it's caused about 4 to 6 inches of sedimentation to start piling up in that barrel pipe, backing up into the barrel, into the embankment itself. This is below an outfall, obviously needs a little bit of help. We'll kind of run through quickly these last things. Underground detention. It's important to inspect these prior to as-built submittals. Are they free of standing water and free of excessive sedimentation and pollutants? Is the contributing drainage area stabilized? On the left, you'll see an SCM, an underground vault with just too much sediment in it. It needs to be removed before final acceptance, and these things will, collect trash and are a repository for all the nasty stuff that's around your job site. Here's one where the water was staged up at a time when we really want to see the bottom of it. You need to make sure that your best underground SCM measures infiltrate as designed, and you're inspecting them during the best times to get an idea of those conditions. This is just a kind of nod to the conveyance. We'll skip over that. Embankment dam. Is the embankment dam free of woody growth or spillway stable and free of erosion? Is the embankment free of visible leaks and holes? Those include rodent holes, groundhogs, things like that. Here's a landscape, a planted tree on the embankment. In general, we do not want any woody growth on embankments, period. So if you notice this in your plan, it's probably a mistake somewhere. Try to identify that early and have it corrected. More likely, we are going to see volunteer vegetation. Here's the yellow poplar on the left, growing on the spillway embankment. And here's our, good old black willow. I included this picture quite a few times because I wanted folks to really understand this is a tree. This will grow into a multi-stem tree, and it will grow very quickly, and it can cause a lot of problems in just a growing season or two, and you need to stay vigilant for these and to remove these as they're seen. Also, there's some cattails popping up there. Overall, SCM, trash, litter, and debris are graded areas uniform and maintained with no rills, gullies, or washouts. This is another big one, rills and gullies. We see these all over, particularly when the stabilization is not as it should have been. Even that is not sufficient. You can see that it's starting to erode where the grass is not as densely grown in as it could be. Again, insufficient vegetation that will lead to erosion problems. Here's kind of another issue I thought was interesting. This rock coffer forebay has a weir notch that is adjacent to the earthen embankment. In big flows, all the water is going to scour around that end and wash away this embankment, particularly since it is unvegetated. I always try to keep that low spot for the weirs in the center of the structure. This is supposed to be a sand filter, enough said. And some other weird things that we've run into, just this SCM didn't show 2 standpipes. We were wondering what the second standpipe was for. We've seen this a few times. This SCM did not show the roof leaders discharging into the main treatment cell. It had a shown discharging into the forebay cell. Make sure your as-builts are showing true to life conditions. Final notes, pass-fail conditions, at least in Charlotte, will be based on, pass and fail will be based on conditions at time of inspection. It's important to think about that vegetation early on and verify critical elevations, particularly at outfalls and inlets. Forebays for dry detention SCMs need to be addressed early on, particularly to address those drainage problems. And my advice is to kind of lean into the details. Make sure you know the manuals that you're working out of. Make sure you're reading the details on your approved plan. And if things don't work out between the details and the plan, bring those issues up early to the PMs and designers and regulators to address it, hopefully minimize the complications further on. Sorry for running over, everybody. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to address them in chat, or you can shoot me an email. Thanks all.
Thank you, Jay. That was really good. I know there's so much you can cover. It's hard to cover it all in 20 minutes. And I don't inspect SCMs, but I'm sure it's, you know, a difficult job at the closeout time that, you know, I would venture to guess that most of them are not without problems. That they all have something, especially when it's something like grading. And, you know, you showed that one extended detention basin that was covered in mud and had standing water, and it was probably lower than the treatment cell.
Yeah, those are big problems, and I think they're pretty pervasive across the jurisdiction. And, you know, I think that across the state, I mean, it all feels new. SCMs are still, and PCSO is still a fairly new concept. So, I mean, this is a growing and evolving industry. So it's important for us all to think about the ways we can address these issues and share it with one another, because these problems that we're experiencing are not unique to our jurisdiction or your jurisdiction. I think we're all dealing with similar hurdles.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we'll go into our next presentation. Sam Jackson was converted from being a Latin teacher to public works by the legendary City of Durham Stormwater Group. He will speak Latin by special request only. I'd like to hear it. This presentation is your opportunity. And Sam joined the elite G2 design team last year. Together, they inspect and consult on thousands of SCMs annually in North Carolina and beyond.
Sorry, Craig. Is this, can you see my screen all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Glad to be here. Easier than junior high Latin teaching for sure. And this, my presentation dovetails really well with what Jay was bringing. So really appreciate the overview that, Jay provided for us. So I'm going to drill down into some closeout issues and just other issues we see both on the design and implementation level. Really grateful to be here. Prayerful that this will be a benefit and that I'll be able to get through these slides. But please, my email is there. Follow up with us. We're happy to help in any way. I do have the regulatory background, which is great. So hopefully we'll be helpful on that. level. And of course, we do thousands upon thousands of SCM inspections. So we have some things to share with you. Disclaimer, I put lessons in quotation marks because there's so much knowledge and expertise here that I don't claim to be an instructor at all. We have things we've learned and things we want to share with you. Love the more of a roundtable notion of a workshop where we're able to share from our experiences. No solutions, only trade-offs is a phrase that often applies in politics and public policy, and sometimes in stormwater as well. There are good and bad trades, so it's worth sometimes rerunning the cost-benefit analysis. And then there are situations where there are clear and obvious solutions. Jay was running through some closeout issues that they see just final walkthrough, but a lot of that was above ground. He did hit some below ground stuff. It's tough with confined space issues for a lot of regulatory bodies to get underground and do sufficient vetting. So the sorts of things that we see can be pretty egregious, and this is just a sampler. So no access manholes whatsoever, and then getting in there and finding no sand at all in the sand chamber. These are first year inspections, so these are stamp of approval. Get down underground and find that both chambers, sediment and sand, are full of sand instead of having an empty sand chamber, of course. Another situation with no access and concrete slabs over the vaults. So all we could do is bore a hole, at least to get a selfie stick through to get some pictures of it. And then the mundane but extremely costly sediment deposition issue. An owner, whoever inherits this first year inspection, is finding extreme levels of sediment in the pipes, and then it has to vac it out first thing. Using the underground system as a little bit of a dump, missing waterproofing, so there's obvious leakage of water, of sand, bricked over inlet conveyance pipes, no drawdown orifice on the weir wall for UD, so it's all going through upper orifices, obviously not per design. This is a personal favorite when we look down that hole and find the ladders all wonky, like somebody's trying to create a Spidey skills course for us. Usually just bring our own ladders. And dents in the storage pipes from construction. So just a plea, this is the first slide, a lot of text here, so you can screenshot it and you'll have access to these slides later to bring to your staff meeting and say, hey, maybe this hasn't happened to us as a regulatory body, but it could. And then fingers get pointed and it gets messy quick. So one notion would be to require thorough photographic journals. Here's pipe 1, 2, 3, not just glamour shots, but this is how the pipes actually look. These are the access points actually implemented. This is the sand chamber actually with sand, timestamp photos, photographic journal. And that way, if there's an issue downstream at the first inspection report, for example, then there's able to be a responsible party clearly identified. This is how it looked. It was done. We can prove it right here. And instead, an HOA getting this and saying, what the heck are we supposed to do here? So those are implementation issues for further discussion and consideration, specifically with undergrounds. At the design level, we see a lot of quote unquote maintenance-free proprietary devices. Maintenance-free is almost always a misnomer. You see at the left, the peephole observation, where you can look at it maybe with a selfie stick, but there's no way you're getting that junk out. So please, just these cookie cutter designs, take another look, take a fresh look. Is there adequate access for maintenance? Maintenance in mind, reviews and designing. Same thing, here's a standard manhole situation, high traffic area, very low safety. Thank you, Kara and Scott, for emphasizing the importance of safety. You could put it in a parking space, but then there's a story behind that, but I managed to pull that off without damaging the paint on that beautiful truck. That is the only access to that underground sand filter. So redundancy would be helpful to design that in. Just on the left, push that manhole over into the striped space and we're golden. There's on the right, huge parking lot, and the one car in the lot, of course, parks in the far back space. over that access point. Could that have been striped over? Could we incorporate more striped spots with manhole covers there? Just ideas, thoughts for consideration. I think sometimes when these are reviewed, you've got one page with the access points and the other page with the site plan, and not necessarily seeing the two together. Because yes, there are adequate access points, but where are they in relation to how the site is actually developed, high traffic areas or parking spots? Here's a beauty that we love. Nobody parks there when sober, at least in the grass. Great size, Bilco access doors, easy to get in, out, inspections, etc. Redundancy, not crazy redundancy. I'm not expecting like 6, but at least there should be more than one way to get in there for maintenance and inspection purposes for any device. Okay, switching into another design that we see a lot of, and I'm speeding through. I'm a reformed Yankee, but we got a lot to cover, so I'm going to try to hit it all. Storm filter vaults downstream of detention pipes. Makes a lot of sense, checks the boxes as far as detention and treatment, but in reality, all of that stuff in the pipes is discharging into that vault, and those cartridges were not designed for that kind of load. So it's fouling them up, reducing design life. You're not getting the treatment and having to replace them far more often than expected. How do you handle that? Again, bright minds on this call. So it'd be lots of fun to have a roundtable discussion to think about how do we make sure the sediment doesn't get to those cartridges. Here's on the left, an attempt at a retrofit, at least for heavier debris and trash, to block that from the storm filter cartridge vault. You could have some heavier mesh to stop the sediment, but then you're gonna have to clean that up. What can you do? Over on the right, here's 8 pipes, all discharging, if you follow that arrow, to the junction box and then the vault. There are possibilities with a junction box like that. So if your site allows it and you can fit one in, is there a way to help the sediment settle in that spot so that it doesn't all get in here? A lot easier to clean it out from here than when it gets here. So just a design consideration, whether you're a consultant or a regulatory agency, suggestions you can make and points you can raise as far as concerns for how those underground detentions are going to foul up the cartridges downstream. Maybe simpler issue, simpler solution, but what we see a lot of, there's no provision for armoring of the discharge from a sediment chamber into the sand chamber, with obvious results with that level of scour. With a lower pipe, you get that much scour. You get this waterfall coming in here from the sediment chamber with obvious results. And there are straightforward solutions as far as riprap armoring with non-woven geotextile fabric underlayment. This probably could be contoured a little better, a little bit more beefy. And probably these are retrofits, so if these things can be spec'd, there'll be more awareness of this being an issue. Then it's in the design and can be implemented. Here's a nice one with all the bells and whistles. You've got a trash guard from the sediment chamber. You've got your perforated pipe for diffuse flow over the sand surface, and throw in for good measure the Encadrain proprietary matting. But this is the first year inspection. So it was a pretty perfect photographic journal submitted showing, hey, this is showroom ready. And if you have a problem with it first year, that's on you, because we finished the job. As far as I know, that photographic journal did not exist. So that's just on whoever happened to inherit this to deal with the repair and fixing it up. Again, great design, great ideas, but they've got to be implemented, and there's got to be accountability for that implementation. Okay, deep breath of fresh air as we surface to the above ground bioretention. Obvious scour issues here, bypass issues with this dinky riprap pad, convex. And here's the next year, and so all right, let's do this right, expand it, nice contouring. not spec'd in the plans, so we could improve probably spec'ing in the plans instead of more generic, showing here's what we need to do to make sure we protect that info. Gotta hit this because it's everybody's favorite, right? Level spreaders, vegetative filter strips. Let it be. I prefer let it be to let it go. Beetles over frozen. Sorry to my daughters. Wetland plants are allowed case by case. So this is what, and that's per MDCs. This is what happens when you try to make grass happy there, and grass does not want to be happy there of any species, erosive channelization throughout. This is one we fought with year after year, trying to make the grass happy. And finally, with cooperation with the regulatory body, said, well, let's just let it be what it wants to be, which is a wetland. So why not spec it at the design stage, put down your TRM, put in soft rush plugs, woolgrass, sedges that are happy there, and great for the environment, great for all parties. Speaking of plants, compliance issues, making it work with planting plans. I've seen so many gourmet multiple zone planting plans that are so aggressive and ambitious, let's say. But the MDCs require 6 feet of shelf, and they require 3 species. And that shelf can be all below, all above, or overlapping that permanent pool line. If I were doing it, I'd put them all in the shallow land. That's just me. I'd take my soft rush, my woolgrass, and any sedge, and I've got my 3. Bam, they're happy. I'm not going to deal with the shallow water. I'm not going to deal with frou-frou, cardinal flower, or milkweed, or if I want something flowering, hibiscus and iris is the way I'm going to go. You can put on the plans the 3, and that's what you're accountable for to get approval, and then sprinkle in the pretty stuff if your HOA wants it, or the this is an amenity for a plaza, then by all means put some in, but then you're not accountable for approval to have all that fancy stuff in there. Did keep this slide in to show these nice shallow water plants that are winners, workhorse plants that we see success with. Certainly in a wetland, of course, you're going to have those. Another point as we move out from that shelf with the planting plants, this transition zone, you've got your shelf down here planted, and I'm not going to get into how to implement turf. That's a whole far bigger topic than we're going to have time for, but by all means, email us. We can tell you our experiences and what we see work out there, and love to learn from you and what you've seen work. Bermuda sod is the way to go, I'd say, one and done approach, rather than fighting with the whole seeding strong thing. But in this picture, you'll see that sod does not extend far enough. So what do you get? You get this, and that's not just going to naturally fill in. This is not, you're not going to turn a construction site into a golf course lawn just by natural processes. So extend that sod. Note these nice no-mow stakes to protect against predators, weed whacking predators. Downstream from that, if it's in maintenance mode and you're having to deal with a shortfall or erosive issues, planting with some nice heavy core matting is a good way to go. In general, planting plans implementation, location and construction stage go together, because you don't really know your location unless you've reached a point in construction stage where you've established your drawdown orifice and the drawdown rate. And then you can say, all right, here's the shallow land, here's the shallow water. Let's make sure we get these in the right place. Otherwise, it's a death sentence for those plants, heavy costs for that replanting. The season, late spring, early summer, give it as long a growing season as possible to establish, but make sure you've got natural predators protection system, the fencing, and the lineage across with a nice pink frilly stuff to prevent goose decapitation. That fencing is helpful for stopping the geese. It's also helpful for stopping the other natural predator, which is the weed whacker wielding Willie. He's not probably going to take his weed whacker over that fence to get a nice big one. And no-mow zones, we wish we saw more of these spec'd, because they're so beneficial just to keep that area vegetated. In this case, this was one that was in maintenance for a while, and we've been fighting them to just let this area grow, not with gourmet plants, didn't have to be any special planting, just let the natural herbaceous provide stability for that shoreline. If you don't put in the protective stakes, then you're asking for it, as you can see here. These folks are paid per hour to take out vegetation, and that's what they're going to do unless you provide the stakes and it's very clear. And even then, they might ignore them, but at least you can try. Over this side, this is a high altitude SCM maintenance company that's preserving that no-mow zone area. Quickly, bioretention, solid versus mulch. These get the same credit, but we see folks wanting to do the mulch and want to make it pretty, but pretty is expensive. Sodded, again, you're going to be able to review these slides yourselves, so I'm just running through them. For one thing, you don't have to have as deep, so if you're dealing with seasonal high water table issues, as far as the depth, that can be an advantage. But when you're doing mulch, right off the bat, 2 to 3 years max, you have to remove and replace. And that means taking that mulch all the way down to the biomedia layer, getting rid of that and putting in the fresh shredded stuff. And if you delay and don't do it, then you've got fibrous roots building up in the mulch. You've got to till it to break it up and then remove it. Not to mention, you're trying to keep these beautiful plants up versus trying to maintain some grass, which often can get very happy in the bioretention environment. Please, PVC Schedule 40, guaranteed idio resistant. Thanks to my boss, Durham, with that phrasing. You can't idiot proof it, but PVC gets close to being idiot resistant. If you put in this HDPE, a toddler can knock it over. At least this takes some real intentional idiocy to take out a PVC Schedule 40 upturn there. If you have IWS, if you're required to have an underdrain per the MDCs, then you're also required to have IWS. And we see folks with that upturn inside the riser, just making it so snug, you can't get at it to grout. You have to dig it from the outside in order to seal that because it's so tight there. And there's no way to dewater it without pumping it down. I don't have a pretty picture of this being implemented. There's clearance here, and there's a cap there that you can screw off if it weren't grouted in. So no clearance at the bottom of the riser, and no way to draw it down, although at least probably in the design there was. Maybe get rid of the riser altogether with a bioretention if your site allows it. So this is a nice one where the discharge comes straight through the shallow dam, and over here you've got overland flow into this wooded area, so no riser necessary. If that's possible, consider it. Avoid all the issues that risers create. Similarly, a dry pond could work that way. There's a nice V-notch for the design storms, but this is the spillway that carries the flow, and you've got your drawdown orifice built in. Another example with a dry pond with that notched weir and spillway structure and the drawdown feature. And even for a wet pond, there are circumstances where that would work. Again, trade-offs, not always solutions, but we see so many issues with risers leaking, with principal spillway pipes. You've got to get your concrete cradle, your seepage diaphragm, all of that just right. So much potential for error, and always potential for error, but there are possibilities here worth it to keep the conversation going. I'm going to put my email address back up there, say thank you very much, and look forward to further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Very great presentation, lots of great information. All right, so we'll roll. We have 2 more presentations and then the Q&A session. As a professional engineer, Mallory Hodgson has worn many leadership hats since graduating from Clemson University in 2014. Mallory worked for 5 years in the private sector prior to joining the town of Harrisburg, where she is currently the Public Works Director. The combination of Mallory's educational background in civil engineering and professional background in project management has allowed her to excel in multiple leadership roles. Mallory Pierce would describe her as an action-oriented leader. She has a wide range of experience in civil engineering field, from water and sewer, stormwater, land development, emergency management, and transportation. Mallory is a proud North Carolinian and takes advantage of the endless opportunities the state has to provide. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Craig, and good morning, everybody. I'm excited to present about this today. I have a lot to share on the topic, so I'm hoping I can get through it within the time frame I have. But today I'm going to be speaking about my municipality's perspective of implementing a post-construction stormwater ordinance. So picture this, kind of to set the scene for those consultants that are on the call. So put yourself in the shoes of a municipality. There are hundreds of BMPs for reducing stormwater pollution, and you're still getting your stormwater management plan together. There's a sample model ordinance and you've adopted it, but you need to tailor it specific to your community. And you don't have any resources. You don't have funding, you don't have staff, you don't have any space to put any staff if you did have them, and you don't have support. So today I'm going to talk about practical administrative steps towards gaining compliance with the post-construction code requirements, despite all of the hurdles. So General Statute 143-214.7 provides local governments with the ability to establish ordinances, specifically to enforce any sort of stormwater program. It gives us the ability to create or designate agencies to administer and enforce the program, and also to combine to establish joint programs and enter agreements for administration and enforcement. So this gives us a ton of flexibility on how to manage the program, but post-construction controls is just one slice of the pie, so to speak. So the post-construction stormwater program is established in the North Carolina Administrative Code, and it sets the standard for the basis of technical guidance that's maintained by NCDEQ. So as we know, the state has tons of guidance on the measure of effectiveness for each stormwater control measure, specifications for design, installation, maintenance, and MS4s or municipalities have the ability to add supplementary design standards, but can never be less strict than the state guidance. So one example I like to use here that's relevant to Harrisburg is that we require that all of our wet ponds, and I love that phrase, wet pond, it's like so redundant, but all our wet ponds have to be installed with fountains. However, the minimum design criteria for wet ponds has fountains as optional. We add it to increase dissolved oxygen in the water. It aids with nutrient removal and helps support aquatic life. And the motion in the water, we've noticed, also deters waterfowl and mosquitoes. So as you listen to this presentation, consider what additional standards would be beneficial to your community and supported by your leadership. And the last thing I want to note for the designers on the call, if you're unsure of which program a municipality is covered by, NCDEQ maintains a post-construction program map that has a lot of information on it for each municipality and which program they might fall under. So if there's a watershed ordinance in place for that municipality, or if they're just governed by a local ordinance, that information is available online. So I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of some tips for smaller local governments. And now that I've set the framework for post-construction ordinance, I'm going to talk about how to actually enforce and administer post-construction controls. First thing I'm going to talk about is getting funding and resources, how to enforce ongoing maintenance, how to lean on your consultants, the benefits of maintaining an inventory, specifically in GIS, and then using other minimum control measures that are part of your phase 2 permits. And then I'd like to talk about a few lessons learned that the town of Harrisburg has had. So my first tip for getting funding, run your stormwater program like a business. Permit compliance does not need to come from stormwater utility fees or your general fund. So if your municipality hasn't established a stormwater fee at all for its customers, a perfect place to gain revenue is to establish review fees, annual reporting compliance fees, and inspection fees. These are services that you have to cover, but they don't have to be free. Adherence to the post-construction minimum control measures requires that staff or a consultant review the construction documents. It's required by state code, but it doesn't mean that you can't pass the cost on. So for post-construction reviews, I would recommend either setting up an MOU at the onset of plan review to just directly pass those costs through it to a consultant. You could calculate fees as fixed rate on per acreage, per linear foot, or do a base fee. And then I would recommend adding fees if submittals go past 2 reviews. So if you're getting into a 3rd and 4th review, you need to reassess those review fees, because your review fee needs to at least cover you for the first 2. You'll have comments on that first submittal, they'll resubmit, but really that should button it up. On the annual reporting compliance, I'm going to get into this a little bit deeper, but charging a fee for administration of collecting, reviewing, commenting, inspecting on those annual reports. And then budgeting appropriately for your own reporting and inspection compliance. So your municipality's stormwater control measures. Treat the other departments in your organization that have stormwater control measures as a business with an O&M agreement. So they need to, if a facility is constructed in your organization and it needs a sand filter for it, maybe you don't necessarily have an O&M agreement because it would be with yourself, but that department needs to be budgeting for their own stormwater maintenance. And then inspection fees, clearly establish those. It's much easier to collect them and enforce them when they're codified. So some general tips for improving annual report compliance. This was a question I saw a lot as I was preparing for this presentation. We talked about requiring an annual inspection report fee. One thing that we've seen a lot of improvement with our compliance with our O&M agreement holders is sending out a reminder letter about a month before it's due. We keep good documentation of the site contact person, and in that reminder letter, we also send an updated contact form. So if you are no longer the person responsible for the ongoing maintenance, please fill this out or reach out to us, let us know who we need to get this to. And if you don't receive a report, send a letter of violation with steps for remediation. And if you never get a response, document the violation and enforce it per your ordinance. You're probably thinking, I need to go beef up my ordinance. A few examples of things you could add to your ordinance pertaining to enforcement would be placing a lien on the property if you need to go do an inspection at your own expense, or if you need to make a repair at your municipality's expense, that should be tax assessed on the property. You could assess a higher inspection fee for those that are not in compliance. Require non-compliant operation and maintenance agreement holders to submit reports monthly to you until they are in compliance, just kind of getting them back in the swing of maintaining their stormwater control measure. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how Harrisburg improved some post-construction compliance with grading plans via a new position that we funded. So the example I have here is that Harrisburg was existing in this gray area of post-construction compliance. The town inspector was inspecting the right-of-way infrastructure, but not the lot infrastructure. The county was inspecting the home construction, but not the lot drainage. And properties were being constructed, they were not being constructed in accordance with the construction plans, which was leading to post-construction issues. So we knew we needed to establish a position to cover the gap, but we didn't want to raise the stormwater rate, and we didn't want to fund the position through the general fund. We knew that the new home build grading compliance would be about 50 to 70% of the new inspector's workload, and the other 30 to 50% would be covering other areas of phase 2 permit compliance. So we came up with a fee by taking the predicted salary for the inspector, predicted number of new homes per year, and coming up with a per lot grading inspection fee. Kind of looked at this to see if it was reasonable, felt that it was on a per lot basis. And we implemented this program in 2019, and it has been extremely successful. There was no increase to our operating budget because this position was funded from fees. It gave us a dedicated stormwater and grading inspector, improved our post-construction compliance. We saw a huge reduction in complaints about grading issues with developer negligence. Now we have a dedicated person to assist with those stormwater control measure closeouts. It's been really great. So to recap on funding, look at your funding, look at your revenue annually. At fiscal year end at a minimum, but really like quarterly, you should be looking at that to make sure that your expenditures are keeping up with your revenue. And then think about direct and indirect costs. So, determine your overhead rate, what it costs you to staff a position outside of just their salary. And then using a bottom-up approach to come up with those fees. So maybe average hours you spend on a review times the hourly rate for the reviewer times the number of reviews. That's an easy way to set a general idea for your review fee. And then as you go through your phase 2 permitting each year, at the end of the year, you're writing your annual report. That's a great time to evaluate gaps and look at your BMPs, look at what was not done, or look where you or maybe were not in compliance, and where do you need to increase revenue to increase your services to increase your compliance. So increasing the stormwater fee or using money from general fund should be your last resort. And then say you do have a big gap, you could justify a future position request or having funding for consultant services. You could justify those expenditures by coming up with that proposed revenue that we talked about. So then we talked a lot about some of the issues with closeout for stormwater control measures. So I want to talk through some things you can do prior to construction starting to have that post-construction compliance. So conducting a thorough review of the plans for post-construction compliance, establishing a detailed review checklist, and it doesn't need to reinvent the wheel, just use the minimum design criteria that NCDEQ maintains, making sure that it's met and setting higher standards if desired by your municipality. And then one thing that we've seen a good success with is requiring that operation and maintenance agreement ahead of plan approval. That O&M agreement needs to clearly cover the successors. So if it's a residential subdivision, the developer is executing the O&M agreement, but the HOA is the successor. So we need to make sure that that is set up. They're not required to re-sign. They're a successor to that agreement. You want to establish a funding mechanism in that O&M agreement. So how are they going to pay for the ongoing maintenance, whether it's via an escrow fund or some other mechanism, and then establish a reporting format. And this could just be a reference to the MDC. It could be a reference to your stormwater drainage manual, and then reference the violation and enforcement. And you don't need to be specific in the O&M agreement because it could change as your ordinance changes, but making sure you're referencing that section of what will happen if it's not, if they're not complying with their post-construction inspections. And then having consistent communication with the site contractor and developer from plan review to closeout. At turnover, I saw a question about, what to do if you're not getting the documentation that you need at the end of the project. They're asking for a CO. Hold that line, I think is what Jay said, and you just have to do that. And if it's absolutely not feasible for them to submit that, we've in the past sometimes bonded things. That's not our desired route, but it is an option. If it's going to be something that we may not be able to get them to come back to do, at least the town would have that surety in place to go do that. A few more tips. So now you're under construction. Construction's coming to a close. Now, how do you wrap this project up to improve post-construction compliance? So one thing we do at turnover is conduct a meeting with the HOA or whatever business entity that's going to be maintaining the stormwater control measure, especially if it's different from the developer. We require that, we go through on this a few tips for maintenance. Sam talked about maintaining that buffer, the planting buffer. We talk about that. We talk about finding a landscaper that knows what they're doing when it comes to stormwater control measures, making sure they're not mowing the whole thing down. We point them to our stormwater drainage manual and where they can find those inspection reports to share with their engineer or whoever is going to be doing their annual inspections. And then before we release the subdivision, before we issue a CO, anything like that, in addition to that, an O&M agreement that was already gotten before the plans were approved, we require a closeout inspection. This kind of sets the basis for their annual inspection moving forward. And with that, we require surveyed as-built grading or topography plan, as-built of the storm drainage infrastructure, as-built stormwater calculations. So what's in place? How did your stormwater calculations actually, how do they come out in the real world? And then pipe videos. That's not something we require currently, but we're looking toward that. So if that's something that your municipality feels that they should have, it's never a bad thing to have. And then, of course, getting that information in CAD format so you can add it to your GIS inventory. Then you'll have a geographic display of where all your stormwater control measures are, where all the pipes are that connect to it. It's very helpfall for doing inspections and outfall inspections. And then that HOA turnover meeting that I talked about, do that as many times as you need to. HOAs change all the time. So if it's something that you need to just schedule with the HOA as their new board gets elected, just do it. And then lastly, I guess not lastly, I've got a few more things. Sorry, guys. But maintaining that inventory of post-construction stormwater control measures, we use the GIS to document our inspections, and then document report compliance, keep contact info updated. It's really easy to export that information to Excel, so it's nice to have it geographically. And then using other minimum control measures to target permit compliance. So that HOA meeting that I was talking about, you can count that toward public education and outreach. And your good housekeeping plan should obviously address stormwater control measure maintenance. So a lot of these areas overlap, and it's okay to take credit for them in more than one area. So if adding positions to your organization is not the right option, and you decide to go the route of a stormwater consultant, the services that they can provide your municipality are limitless. But if you're just getting started, consider having a consultant conduct stormwater document reviews. They can focus solely on post-construction. You can do your own cost-benefit analysis to determine if your municipality could support an in-house person versus just administering a contract. And they should be able to work on a task order basis for post-construction controls, and your contract should run with the fiscal year and not exceed it. It might be easier to bite off some small tasks versus the entire phase 2 permit compliance. So those stormwater document reviews, administration of post-construction inspection, and then maybe doing post-construction inspections for your municipal facilities is another good way to engage a consultant. So to wrap up, I wanted to share 2 other things that Harrisburg has done that kind of have gone off the path of the model ordinance. They didn't work for us, and that's okay. The sample ordinance does not need to be your municipality's ordinance. So one example I had was the establishment of the escrow account as it pertains to the HOAs. The sample language in the escrow account had 15% developer contribution, then 2/3 of the cost to construct over 5 years, and then 1/3 over 10 years. Was ambiguous to us, and it left confusion on what the intent of where the fund balance should be. And we had a lot of HOAs expressing confusion or concern over which part the developer was supposed to put in and which part they were supposed to put in. And then it was going to change what their contribution was over the years. It was going to, cost them more later. We got a lot of confusing questions about that. But what we decided to do was increase the developer's initial contribution to 25%. And then the remainder was just spread over 10 years so that they would just have an ongoing set amount of how much they were to contribute to their escrow account for maintenance. It gave the HOA a little bit more control over how their annual fee was structured, or, the monthly fee for the HOA. And then the second example, we had a lot of, when I started with the town, I had no idea where annual reports were in the process. So I don't think anyone had actually submitted an annual report to us, and I needed to get everyone in compliance really quickly. So rather than going back and trying to figure out when they closed out and a year from then would be when their annual report was due, I just set a deadline. So we actually made it November 30th, which gives us the month of December to make sure that everybody has submitted their annual report. In January, we send out those letters of violation if we didn't receive a report, if we didn't receive the review fee. And then, we work with those O&M agreement holders to make sure that they're staying in compliance, doing anything they need to do to stay in compliance. But we've drastically increased compliance with doing our annual reporting that way. So it's been a huge help. And that's all I had for you all today. Again, my email's on the screen. It'll be shared at the end, but thank you for having me here. It was really great sharing some of our information with you all.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mallory. You shared a lot of great practical examples and tips that you've done there in Harrisburg that I think are relevant for not just small municipalities, but I think there are things in Charlotte we could also take away from that. So thank you. Our last presenter is John McDonald. He is the Senior Government Affairs Associate for the North Carolina League of Municipalities. His portfolio includes infrastructure and energy, along with other issues. Prior to joining the league as a state lobbyist, he had 13 years of experience in the United States Senate. The North Carolina League of Municipalities is a member-driven organization representing the interests of cities and towns in the state. Their membership includes over 540 towns and cities across the state. whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks everybody on the call today. Thanks for the invite. John McDonald with the League of Municipalities, and I'm going to jump right in here and first give kind of a brief overview of what occurred in the long session, what's going on kind of politically with redistricting, et cetera. Then we'll go over an overview of the budget, including some of the items related to infrastructure, and then finally stormwater and land use legislation that moved to the legislature this year. I think a lot of those on the call will be interested in what passed, what moved, and what didn't, and leave some time for everybody to have a nice question and answer session after my presentation. 151 session laws were enacted through the long session. This will change again when they return next April for the short session. Obviously, a lot of in the news this week on Medicaid expansion, but abortion, gambling, et cetera, removed. 151 session laws is a little on the lower end, what we've seen in the last couple of years, but they did move a tremendous amount of legislation in the House and in the Senate, but not necessarily passing both bodies. The governor's veto was very important throughout the session. Once Representative Cotham from Mecklenburg County switched from the Democratic to Republican caucus, that gave supermajorities for both the Senate and House Republicans, so they could overturn any gubernatorial veto that occurred. That happened 19 times this session. I think the biggest takeaway for the long session, and it will hold for next year, and likely, even though Speaker Moore has announced he's not returning to Raleigh, instead is going to pursue a congressional district for the United States House. The tensions really were between the House and the Senate, not necessarily on ideological lines, because they are within the same party, but more what the focus of was and should be. Most evidently on medicinal marijuana, but also you saw a delay in the budget passage was largely due to the House and Senate not being on the same page relative to gambling, and a whole host of other items where the House had one priority and the Senate had another. Redistricting, we have maps. This is the third or fourth variation of these maps we've had over the last 5 years. The hope is that these maps will hold for the rest of the decade, but we shall see. Just as a little bit of background, unaffiliated voters are now the largest, have a plurality of registrations, followed by Democrat registration. Republicans have been gaining slightly or staying the same. Democratic registrations have been falling. That if you know even a little bit of North Carolina politics, you know that because the county has a Democratic registration advantage or Republican one, that does not necessarily mean they will vote that way. The best probably example is Robeson County, which has gone staunchly red over the last decade. But still, according to this map here, Democrats hold a registration advantage. Many people are registering as unaffiliated. North Carolina, for their primary elections, allow unaffiliated voters to pick whichever primary ballot they want. So there is a motivation of that. But we also know that young voters generally are choosing to register unaffiliated. But we also know that they lean heavily Democratic. There are some precincts within Wake County where it's 80+% unaffiliated voters. At the same time, they are in the last election, they voted for, say, Joe Biden at the presidential level at about the same rate. Current makeup, was 71 in the House prior to Representative Cotham switching parties, and they had 72 to have the supermajority right on the nose. Similarly, for the Senate, they had 30. The House map, it's difficult probably to see each individual district here, but this kind of gives you an idea of how, especially in the rural, exurban areas, you have bigger districts with county focuses, but then once you go into Mecklenburg, Durham, Wake, Guilford counties, much smaller districts within those counties. Senate map, a little more county focused, but similarly, in the bigger counties, they're split up. And finally, the congressional map. This will be the iteration we believe that will hold for the forthcoming elections. The filing period is open here for the next, I believe, 13 or 14 days. And we'll have a clear view of who's running, who's retiring, et cetera, within all these districts. Just a little visualization on for the North Carolina House side. These are the areas which will probably determine whether or not there will be supermajorities in the House, in the North Carolina House after the next election. So these will be on election night. The districts you will keep an eye on. The Tricia Cotham's district is basically a toss-up type of district based on voter registrations in southeastern Mecklenburg County. The current minority leader, Robert Reeves, Chatham County district right in the heart of the state. These will be the ones. Most of these other districts have a pretty strong partisan bent one way or the other. So whoever wins the primary is most likely to win those districts. This is another way to visualize this. The Locke Foundation took some of the work done at the national level by the Cook Political Report and did a similar exercise to take a look at what the basic leans of districts are, and this is the product. So Republicans will continue, certainly favored to retain a outright majority, but will be on the cusp most likely of being able to hold a supermajority in 2025. Now, having said that, in 2010, Democrats probably felt confident, in 2009, probably felt confident they would be able to continue to hold their majorities within the North Carolina House and Senate and with the congressional delegation. But voter preferences change, they change quickly. So while these are projections a year out, nothing certainly is for certain. As with, we do redistricting all the time in North Carolina, and we have court cases that follow them. I will note yesterday a court case was filed against the congressional seats. Last week, a court case was filed against the North Carolina Senate districts and for districts in Pender and Jones County. The district court didn't, frankly, they didn't have a very favorable view of the plaintiffs in that case. In the North Carolina Senate case on timing, they said they waited too long to get an emergency injunction to stop the candidate filing, which is currently underway. So we'll see how these progress, but it seems that at least the maps that I previously showed you will hold for the upcoming election in 2024. The state Senate budget, I think everybody's seen most of the highlights for these. $30 billion overall. Medicaid expansion, which took effect this week. For a lot of them on the call, especially the municipalities, received earmarks directly related to their drinking wastewater or stormwater projects. 200 municipal projects are funded with $2 billion. The hope had been that this amount of money would be spent. This is the first time that such a substantial amount of money had been allocated by the legislature using general fund dollars for these types of infrastructure projects on the water side. All the money basically is going to be spent through earmarks. We would have preferred that money to be spent, to be given through DEQ and then some of the state processes. But the legislators decided to earmark most of the money. These are for kind of municipalities writ large, but I will flag the last bullet there. There was provision in the budget this year that prohibits local governments from denying erosion permits based on the need for this project over environmental permits. The legislators were very irritated at DEQ, frankly, over what they viewed as intransigence about the MVP natural gas pipeline, but the provision they put in would have much broader implications for municipalities. And that brings me to a list of a number of the stormwater specific bills that moved. It will be noted in here if there was the actual session law and it passed. I would highly recommend that if you're a consultant or a municipality on here and you have specific questions, please reach out at the end. You also have a session law you can look up on the North Carolina legislature's website, and you can get a little more specific details on these. So the first was a bill that would have been a really, really good reform at HB 511. It did get one House committee hearing, which for this type of provision was actually a win. We hope in the short session and the long session we'll be able to build more support for this and maybe get it through the House and Senate. But the bill would limit the existing prohibition, which covered both residential and commercial construction. It would only limit it to the prohibition would only be on the residential side, so that locals could require stormwater controls for redevelopment, versus currently it put a blanket prohibition for both commercial and residential side. HB 579 only passed the House, but would have complicated what kind of Mallory had discussed a little bit earlier about MS4 and programs run by municipalities that go above and beyond what the state required. Under this provision, once a municipality or the state issued an NCGO1 permit, the municipality could not go above and beyond those requirements related to sedimentation controls. The big Regulatory Reform Act, HB 600, passed this year. Frankly, it could have been much worse for those on this call. There was going to be limitations on vegetation controls, etc. I think we're fairly successful in limiting some of the negative effects that could have arose from here. I think the big provision within this bill would require property owners to treat the increase in stormwater resulting from the net increase in built upon areas. They had to treat all. So that is a change, and it will make a little more difficult for municipalities to force the requisite stormwater controls needed. Further, stormwater rules were changed, including removing the DOT right away from service calculations. And you have to take into account existing controls when determining stormwater fees for certain projects. This bill did not, SB 684 did not pass, although as noted here, portions of this were included in the budget as passed. This was really more aimed at DEQ. The frustration level with DEQ and timeliness for their review of certain permits, including stormwater, was very high with legislators. This is one of those areas where municipalities were doing far better than DEQ on timeliness. So it would have set some shot clocks for DEQ. But it would also, and what was included in the budget, did increase a number of fees that would allow DEQ to hire additional staff to meet some of these timeliness requirements. HB 488 did become law, and as you see here, it limited the amount of fee to $100 per lot for lots under 1 acre. So if you had one large 100-acre parcel and it was subdivided into 100 lots, the fee structure had previously allowed you to set one fee for the entire plot of land, but this would limit it to $100 per lot for each one under 1 acre. Additionally, and this goes to the amount of money that can be held in escrow to ensure compliance, that it prohibits requiring payments from a developer or landowner for the future maintenance by capping that at 10% of the original project's cost. That money you can require the HOA or the developer to hold that money into escrow. The city cannot hold that on their behalf, and previous funds that had been held in escrow by the municipality have to be made available to the owner at their request. These two are not stormwater specific, although they were flagged that they raised some concerns for those that would be on this webinar today. So SB 675 really drew the ire, frankly, of our membership, and they made legislators know. So it didn't end up moving out of the Senate and was amended substantially within committee even before it moved toward the Senate floor. But because it was going to remove all extraterritorial ETJ authority for cities across the state. Some of our largest municipalities, this was not going to be as big of an issue as it could have been for our mid-sized and growing municipalities. But at the end of the day, the Senate decided not to move forward with it, and the amended version would have remove the ETJ authority for those cities within counties with population size less of 50,000. The biggest town, I believe, in our membership that was affected by this would have been Roxborough. There was some other lot size and open space provisions that had been in the initial Senate draft that were also removed. And finally, another one that had really drove a lot of engagement from our membership, HB 332, would create a shot clock of 21 days for commercial and multi-family planning reviews, and authorize developers to be able to go to a third party under certain circumstances. There was a lot of changes to this through the process. The Senate had a companion bill, although we were in negotiations with the Senate sponsors on this, and we thought we were going to be able to get to a good spot had it moved forward in the Senate. It did not. This is one of those items, along with ETJ, that we're going to keep an eye on in the short session. This is my contact information. They're going to put the contact information for everybody on this call up at the end. And I would just say that for the municipalities on this call and for the contractors, there are a few legislators who cared deeply about stormwater legislation and regulation. But most of the legislators in that building on Jones Street really have no background and they do not understand it. Thus, they yield to the ones who care about it. It is very important that you engage with the legislators to let them know how important these types of items are for your organizations, so we can stop some of these bad ideas, frankly, from coming to fruition in the future. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, John. We're only about 4 minutes behind schedule. There have been some questions put in the Q&A feature, and a lot of them have been answered, so you can look at those. And then David Caldwell is going to facilitate additional question Q&A, and then we'll close out.
Okay, thank you. So I'm David Caldwell. I'm chair of the Public Education and Training Committee with RSPC. I appreciate all the questions, all the presenters, and over 300 people attending today. Like Craig said, most of the questions have been answered already. We have a couple in here now. One for John: what are the prospects of advancing House Bill 511 in 2024?
I can't understate how big of a deal, frankly, it was that the bill received a hearing and moved. It had multiple committees had jurisdiction over it, and it moved through one. We think that if we can put together a bigger coalition, especially with those important, and I'm not speaking for the Chamber of Commerce, but an example of this, if we can get buy-in from some of the business community as well to say how important this is, that a possibility certainly exists. I wouldn't put it at a high chance, frankly, if I was setting kind of a Vegas line on it. But I would say that I think having the fact they even had a conversation about it and moved it out of one committee is a great starting point that we can kind of build on.
John, can you just, for some of the rest of us, maybe remind us what that one was about, House Bill 511?
I muted myself, sorry. Yeah, so the bill would limit the existing prohibition that existed on the ability for municipalities to require private property owners to install newer increased stormwater controls for pre-existing development or redevelopment. Basically, if you had a property and it was being redeveloped, the stormwater controls that were in place were the ones that would continue to be in place. The municipality couldn't put additional requirements on you when you did that redevelopment. 511 would say that for commercial properties, the municipality could put, I want to make sure I say this correctly. The municipalities would have the authority to ensure the redevelopment of a property includes adequate stormwater controls. Versus now, you don't have that authority at all. 10 years ago, municipalities had this authority, but it was removed by the legislature. So this is the first step in trying to undo that wrong, frankly.
Thank you for clearing that up. Let's see, we had one other question in here for Mallory. Are the existing HOAs grandfathered and under old regs when an ordinance is changed or modified, like the escrow requirement you described changing to 10 years of funding?
So a few questions on this, and yes and no. You can't collect if your municipality was collecting the funds and self-administering the escrow account balance. You're not able to do that anymore, and that's not something that Harrisburg was doing. But if you are, those funds would need to be made available to the HOA or whoever would be responsible for the maintenance. And then if there was an issue that required maintenance, they would just draw that fund balance down before. You don't have to give it back, but before you could assess any additional expenses to the HOA, you would have to dwindle that fund balance down that they'd already established. And then any other, the way I interpret it is if there's a fund balance required for the ongoing maintenance, it's 100% administered through the HOA or business entity that's maintaining the stormwater control measure.
Okay. We're about to wrap up here. I want to maybe throw out just one more question that there were, just because in the questions that were submitted ahead of time, there were several questions about HOA compliance and just bridging that gap, between the HOA and the developer. I know Mallory touched on that some, but I just wanted to throw that question out to everybody else. Do you have any suggestions or tips on how to educate HOAs about their responsibilities with SCMs, and any tips or things that you've learned on trying to get HOAs to know what they're supposed to do?
I can answer that question a little bit. Based off of our long-term stewardship program, we actually implement some responsibility sheets with HOAs or our landowners that we hold easements for. So the long-term stewardship team that I work on, we handle all of our closeout projects. So we actually read through all of the easement language that we have with them, and then we create a responsibility sheet that we can actually hand to the HOA or present to them and go over it. So that way they know all the layman's terms. It's not within the easement language. It's pretty straightforward, and it spells out exactly what they're responsible for with our wet pond easements that we hold with them. So it just takes all the guessing out of it and makes it just straightforward for them to be able to understand that. And then we make sure that they have our contact information, that if they have any questions or have any problems with their ponds, they could go ahead and reach out to us and we can help them out with that as well.
Okay. Thank you. We had another question for Mallory. What are some of the best practices or methods in capturing, well, this is kind of what I just said, capturing a change of hands in the HOA or the HOA's management companies responsible for maintaining the HOA? In other words, how do municipalities keep from tracking down responsible parties from people who are no longer involved?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what Kara said, just keeping that communication open, but through project closeout, and then when the new entity takes over, It's a lot of work. It's just sometimes you are just tracking down somebody who's not involved anymore, and it's just reaching out to them multiple times to find the new contact. But just because they don't respond doesn't relieve the municipality of the responsibility to ensure the ongoing maintenance. So sometimes you just have to really keep annoying them to get an updated contact info or get a response. Another thing, like if you're a water sewer utility as well, they have a water and sewer bill. You can find who's paying the water and sewer bill and reach out to them that way. I've had to do that before. But yeah, sometimes you just have to hunt them down. So
Okay, well, it looks like we're at 11:02. There's one more question for John. If I'll just ask him if he could maybe answer that in the Q&A, maybe, so we can move on to wrapping this up.
David, let me just say quickly
Okay.
to the answer to that question I suggest going to go look at the bill. However, it would allow, based on a test of land disturbance and the percentage of the tract that is being redeveloped, that you could require additional stormwater controls only for the amount of impervious surface being created through the redevelopment.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks, David, and the panelists and presenters for answering those additional questions, and those of you that submitted and everybody that attended. Really great workshop. I mean, just excellent practical information from all of you. Had a lot of participants that I think benefited from it. Thank you all for attending. So a reminder about certificate of attendance, you can scan that QR code there. I also posted a link as in the Q&A to that page. And another reminder about the annual membership meeting that you're all invited to, February 14th, 2024. Email carrie.rayburn@risingsolutionsplc.com for more information and to get an invite to that. And thank you for attending. Thank you again to all of our presenters. Everybody have a great day and rest of the week.